Within every woman lives an inner girl, timeless, sensitive, imaginative, and deeply intuitive. She is not a memory locked in the past. She is a living psychic presence that shapes how you love, trust, receive, and express yourself. When she is wounded, the feminine essence becomes guarded. When she is healed, the feminine flows effortlessly, like water returning to its natural course. The inner girl is formed in the earliest encounters with love, safety, and recognition. When her emotions were dismissed, her softness criticized, or her needs unmet, she learned to adapt. She may have become overly pleasing, emotionally distant, or fiercely independent. These adaptations were not weaknesses, they were intelligent survival strategies. Yet what once protected her may now restrict your ability to feel, receive, and radiate feminine energy. Healing begins not by fixing, but by remembering. The inner girl does not ask to be corrected, she asks to be seen. When you turn inward with compassion, you reclaim parts of yourself that were abandoned in moments of confusion or pain. Each time you honor your emotions instead of suppressing them, you tell her she is safe. Each time you rest without guilt, you teach her she is worthy without performance. The feminine essence thrives in receptivity, presence, and emotional truth. But these qualities cannot bloom where the inner girl still feels unsafe. If she fears rejection, you will struggle to receive love. If she fears judgment, you will dim your radiance. Healing her is not indulgence, it is psychic integration. It is the reunion of innocence and wisdom within you. As the inner girl heals, control softens. You no longer force outcomes or chase validation. You begin to trust the rhythm of life and your place within it. Creativity awakens, sensuality deepens, intuition sharpens. This is not a performance of femininity. It is its embodiment. You become magnetic not because you try, but because you are whole. To heal the inner girl is to reclaim your natural authority over your inner world. From this foundation, feminine essence emerges effortlessly, grounded, luminous, and deeply rooted in self-trust. When she is healed, you are no longer seeking permission to be yourself. You simply are. The inner girl is not a metaphor or a sentimental idea. She is a living psychological presence that continues to influence how a woman feels, chooses, loves, and values herself. She exists beneath conscious thought, shaping emotional reactions long before logic has time to intervene. Every experience that once taught her what love meant, what safety felt like, and how acceptance was earned, left an imprint on her inner world. These imprints quietly organize emotional patterns, deciding whether a woman feels worthy of care, afraid of abandonment, or compelled to prove her value through effort and endurance. From early moments of life, the inner girl learned how to survive emotionally. If affection was inconsistent, she learned to become vigilant. If approval was conditional, she learned to perform. If her feelings were minimized or ignored, she learned to silence them. None of these responses were failures, they were intelligent adaptations. Yet the psyche does not discard these strategies when childhood ends. They follow the woman into adulthood, quietly shaping her relationships, her boundaries, and the way she speaks to herself when no one else is listening. Self-worth is not formed through affirmations alone. It is rooted in the emotional memory of being seen and valued. When the inner girl did not feel emotionally mirrored, she internalized the belief that her needs were excessive or inconvenient. This belief later appears as guilt for resting, anxiety when receiving love, or discomfort when being chosen without effort. A woman may appear confident on the surface, while the inner girl within her still doubts her right to exist without justification. Emotional patterns repeat, because the psyche seeks resolution. The inner girl unconsciously recreates familiar emotional landscapes, even painful ones, because they feel known. This is why certain relationships feel magnetic despite being unfulfilling, and why emotional neglect can feel strangely normal. The inner girl is not seeking suffering, she is seeking completion. She is attempting to rewrite an unfinished emotional story by reliving it in different forms. When a woman begins to observe her emotional reactions without judgment, she is encountering her inner girl. Sudden sadness, disproportionate fear, or a deep need for reassurance are not signs of weakness. They are communications from a younger layer of the self that is still asking to be acknowledged. Self-worth begins to shift not when these emotions are suppressed, but when they are listened to with patience and respect. As the inner girl is recognized and emotionally validated, her grip on unconscious behavior loosens. The woman no longer needs to earn rest, chase approval, or harden herself to feel safe. Gradually, emotional responses become more spacious, less reactive, and more grounded. Self-worth moves from something that must be proven to something that is quietly assumed. In this way, the living presence of the inner girl transforms from a hidden source of emotional pain into a stable inner foundation that supports authenticity, emotional clarity, and a deeply rooted sense of value. Emotional wounds do not weaken the psyche, they organize it. When the feminine encounters pain in moments where safety, affection, or emotional recognition are missing, the psyche adapts with remarkable intelligence. These adaptations arise not as conscious choices, but as instinctive responses designed to preserve connection, dignity, or survival. In early emotional life, the feminine learns how to remain acceptable, how to avoid abandonment, and how to endure disappointment without collapsing. What emerges from these moments are protective patterns that once served a vital purpose. A woman who learned that vulnerability invited rejection may develop emotional restraint. Another who discovered that love was conditional may become excessively giving, believing closeness must be earned through effort and sacrifice. One who felt unseen may cultivate self-sufficiency so complete that receiving feels uncomfortable or unsafe. These behaviors were once shields. They allowed the feminine to function in environments that could not fully hold her sensitivity. They preserved the self at a time when emotional resources were limited, yet the psyche does not easily relinquish what once ensured survival. Over time, these same protective behaviors solidify into identity. Emotional restraint becomes emotional distance. Generosity becomes self-erasure. Independence becomes isolation. The feminine essence, which thrives in flow, receptivity, and emotional presence, begins to contract. Expression becomes cautious. Desire becomes muted. Intuition is overridden by control. The woman may feel strong and capable, yet inwardly disconnected from softness, pleasure, and emotional depth. These adaptive behaviors do not disappear simply because circumstances improve. Even in safe relationships, the nervous system may remain vigilant. Even when love is offered freely, the impulse to guard or overfunction persists. The psyche continues to respond to the present as though it were the past. What was once protection now becomes limitation, not because it was wrong, but because it is no longer necessary. Feminine expression requires safety, both external and internal. When the inner world remains organized around old wounds, the feminine cannot fully relax into being. Creativity feels risky. Sensuality feels exposed. Emotional openness feels dangerous. The woman may unconsciously equate softness with vulnerability and vulnerability with loss. As a result, she may lead with control, intellect, or productivity, while her emotional and intuitive dimensions remain underexpressed. Healing does not involve dismantling these adaptations through force. They must be understood and honored for the role they once played. When awareness replaces self-judgment, the psyche begins to soften. The feminine can slowly renegotiate its relationship with safety, allowing sensitivity to return without fear of collapse. As the old defenses loosen, expression becomes more fluid, authentic, and embodied. What was once armor transforms into discernment, and what once limited the feminine becomes the very doorway through which her essence can finally move freely again. Healing does not arise from silencing pain or disciplining emotion into obedience. It unfolds when the psyche is met with compassion, sustained presence, and emotional validation. The instinct to suppress feelings often develops early, when expressing emotion leads to misunderstanding, rejection, or dismissal. Over time, the psyche learns that survival requires containment, composure, and self-denial. This form of self-suppression may create the appearance of strength, yet beneath it, emotional life becomes fragmented, unheard, and unresolved. Compassion is not indulgence, it is a psychological necessity. When inner experiences are met with harshness or impatience, the wounded aspects of the self retreat further into the unconscious. Pain does not dissolve when it is ignored. It intensifies, often emerging as anxiety, numbness, or emotional volatility. Compassion allows the psyche to relax its defenses. It communicates safety to the inner world, signaling that emotions no longer need to fight for recognition. In this environment, healing becomes possible because the self is no longer at war with itself. Presence is the act of staying with emotional experience without attempting to control its outcome. Many individuals attempt to heal by understanding, analyzing, or reframing their pain, yet remain emotionally absent while doing so. True presence requires allowing sensation, memory, and feeling to arise without immediate correction. When emotions are fully experienced in awareness, they begin to complete their natural cycle. What was once overwhelming becomes tolerable, and what was once avoided becomes integrated. Presence restores continuity to the psyche, reconnecting fragmented emotional states into a coherent inner narrative. Emotional validation does not mean agreeing with every feeling or allowing emotion to dictate behavior. It means acknowledging that what is felt has meaning and origin. When the inner world is validated, it no longer needs to exaggerate its distress to be heard. A feeling that is recognized loses its compulsive intensity. Validation transforms emotion from a threat into information, allowing insight to emerge organically. The psyche learns that it does not need to dramatize pain in order to secure attention. Self-suppression, by contrast, teaches the inner world that only certain emotions are acceptable. This creates internal division. The rejected feelings persist in shadow, influencing behavior indirectly through projection, emotional shutdown, or self-sabotage. Over time, the individual may lose access to intuition and emotional vitality, mistaking numbness for stability. Healing cannot occur in this divided state because wholeness requires inclusion, not exclusion. When compassion replaces judgment, presence replaces avoidance, and validation replaces denial, the psyche reorganizes itself. Emotional energy, once used to maintain suppression, becomes available for creativity, connection, and authentic expression. Healing, in this sense, is not an achievement but a return back to an inner environment where all aspects of the self are allowed to exist without fear of rejection. Feminine essence is not something that can be summoned through effort or imitation. It emerges naturally when the inner world feels safe enough to soften. At the center of this inner world lives the inner girl, the earliest emotional self, whose experiences of being seen, heard, and protected shape the body's capacity to relax into receptivity. When she feels unsafe or unseen, the psyche organizes itself around protection rather than expression. In such a state, the feminine cannot fully unfold, not because it is absent, but because it is guarding itself. Safety is the soil in which feminine essence grows. Without it, the nervous system remains alert, scanning for threat, approval, or abandonment. The inner girl, having learned that visibility once carried risk, may equate openness with danger. As a result, softness becomes restrained, emotions become filtered, and authenticity is traded for control. A woman may appear composed, capable, and strong, yet her inner landscape remains tense, unable to surrender into the natural flow of feeling and intuition. Being unseen creates a deeper wound than overt rejection. When the inner girl's emotions were overlooked or minimized, she learned that her inner life did not matter. This absence of recognition often leads to a quiet erasure of needs. The woman may struggle to identify what she desires or feel discomfort when attention is given without effort. Feminine essence, which thrives on being received and reflected, cannot flourish in an environment where the self expects invisibility in response to feeling unsafe. The psyche may adopt roles that ensure survival. These roles often emphasize productivity, independence, or emotional restraint. While these qualities can be valuable, they become limiting when they replace emotional truth. The feminine essence does not respond to pressure, it responds to permission. When the inner girl is forced to perform or endure, her natural playfulness, sensuality, and emotional openness retreat. What remains is function without vitality. The body often carries this disconnection. Tightness, fatigue, or chronic tension can signal an inner state of vigilance. The feminine body is designed for rhythm and responsiveness, yet it cannot access these qualities when the inner girl remains alert for danger. Even moments of joy may feel fleeting as the nervous system struggles to trust their permanence. The inability to rest deeply or receive fully often points back to an inner child who learned that safety was temporary. When the inner girl begins to feel seen through attentive presence and emotional acknowledgement, the psyche gradually releases its grip on control. The need to prove, protect, or withhold diminishes. In this softened state, feminine essence begins to surface naturally, expressed through warmth, intuition, creativity, and embodied confidence. Not as a performance, but as a state of being that arises when the inner world finally feels secure enough to open. Innocence and maturity are often treated as opposing forces, yet within the psyche, they are meant to exist in relationship rather than conflict. Innocence carries spontaneity, emotional honesty, imagination, and the capacity for wonder. Maturity carries discernment, responsibility, and the ability to navigate reality with grounded awareness. When these two aspects are divided, the inner world becomes fragmented. Either innocence is suppressed in the name of strength, or maturity is rejected in pursuit of freedom. Integration occurs when both are allowed to coexist, restoring a natural inner balance that reawakens intuition, creativity, and receptivity. When innocence is abandoned too early, the psyche learns to value control over curiosity. Emotional openness is replaced with caution, and imagination is restrained by practicality. This premature maturity often results in a hyper-rational inner life where intuition is dismissed as unreliable and feeling is subordinated to logic. While this may create competence, it drains vitality. Creativity becomes effortful, intuition quiets, and receptivity feels unsafe. The inner world becomes efficient but emotionally sterile. Conversely, when maturity is underdeveloped, innocence may dominate without containment. Emotions overwhelm discernment, desires lack direction, and intuition becomes confused with impulse. Without grounding, sensitivity can feel chaotic rather than illuminating. True integration does not favor one side over the other. It allows innocence to inform maturity and maturity to protect innocence. In this relationship, emotional truth is honored without losing stability, and imagination is expressed without losing coherence. Intuition emerges most clearly when innocence and maturity are aligned. Innocence provides access to subtle perception and emotional nuance, while maturity offers the capacity to interpret and act on this information wisely. Without innocence, intuition becomes muted. Without maturity, it becomes unreliable. When integrated, intuition feels calm, embodied, and trustworthy. It no longer shouts through anxiety or disappears under overthinking. It speaks quietly and confidently. Creativity follows the same principle. Innocence supplies playfulness, inspiration, and the courage to explore without certainty. Maturity provides structure, discipline, and the patience required to bring ideas into form. When either is missing, creativity suffers. Ideas remain unrealized, or creation becomes rigid and uninspired. Integration allows creativity to flow naturally, balancing freedom with form, spontaneity with intention, receptivity. A core aspect of feminine expression depends on this inner union. Innocence allows the self to receive without suspicion, while maturity ensures discernment and boundaries. When innocence alone is present, receptivity can lead to vulnerability without protection. When maturity dominates, receptivity shuts down entirely. Integrated receptivity feels open yet grounded, soft yet self-respecting. Through this inner synthesis, the psyche regains a sense of wholeness. The self no longer oscillates between guarded adulthood and wounded childhood. Instead, a coherent inner presence emerges, capable of sensing, creating, and receiving with clarity. In this state, intuition sharpens, creativity deepens, and receptivity becomes a natural expression of an integrated inner life rather than a learned behavior. When the inner girl is healed, confidence no longer depends on performance, comparison, or external approval. It arises quietly from within, rooted in a deep sense of inner safety. The psyche no longer needs to prove worth or defend against rejection, because the earliest emotional self has learned that she is valued simply for existing. This internal security becomes the foundation of authentic confidence, one that feels steady rather than loud, embodied rather than constructed. A healed inner girl does not seek validation to confirm her value. She has learned that her emotions are legitimate, her needs are permissible, and her presence does not require justification. From this place, confidence expresses itself through ease. A woman moves, speaks, and chooses without the tension of self-surveillance. There is no constant inner negotiation about whether she is too much or not enough. The absence of this inner conflict creates a calm self-assurance that others instinctively feel. Magnetism emerges as a natural consequence of inner coherence. When the inner girl is no longer hiding or bracing for disappointment, the psyche becomes transparent. There is alignment between feeling and expression, between inner truth and outward presence. This congruence creates an energetic clarity that draws others in. Magnetism is not created by effort or strategy. It is the byproduct of being emotionally available to oneself. People respond to this availability because it signals safety, authenticity, and emotional depth. Feminine flow becomes possible when the nervous system is no longer organized around protection. A healed inner girl trusts that rest will not lead to abandonment and that openness will not lead to harm. This trust allows the body and psyche to relax into rhythm rather than rigidity. Movement becomes fluid, emotions move freely, and intuition guides action without resistance. Feminine flow is not passivity, it is responsive strength, capable of adapting without losing center. Without healing, the inner girl often pulls the psyche into extremes, either overcompensating through control or withdrawing through self-protection. Healing integrates her needs into conscious awareness, so they no longer dominate behavior from the shadows. The woman becomes able to set boundaries without fear and open her heart without self-betrayal. This balance enhances presence, making interactions feel grounded and genuine. As the inner girl heals, desire and joy return without guilt. Pleasure no longer feels dangerous, and success no longer feels burdensome. The woman allows herself to receive attention, support, and abundance without suspicion. This capacity to receive is a cornerstone of feminine magnetism, rooted not in dependence but in self-trust. Ultimately, a healed inner girl provides the emotional ground from which authentic confidence, magnetism, and feminine flow naturally arise. There is nothing to force, imitate, or perfect. The woman becomes compelling, not because she is trying to be seen, but because she is no longer hiding from herself, and so the journey returns you not to something new, but to something true. Healing the inner girl is the quiet reconciliation between who you had to become and who you were always meant to be. When she is no longer silenced, rushed, or hidden, your strength no longer needs armor and your softness no longer needs permission. From this inner wholeness, confidence rises without effort, magnetism flows without strategy, and feminine energy moves as a natural state rather than a practiced role. You do not become powerful by hardening yourself. You become powerful by allowing every part of you to belong. When the inner girl is finally safe, seen, and held within you, the feminine no longer waits to emerge. It simply lives through you.